We have found ourselves at the end. This digital fast wasn't just about unplugging, but about coming back with intention. Let go of the apps and activities that drain you, and curate a space filled with connections and experiences that bring you closer to God and a life of joy. Remember, this is an ongoing process. Regularly check in on your digital life and make adjustments as needed. Your phone should be a source of happiness, not a burden. So, let's move forward and cultivate a digital life that reflects the joy that you've rediscovered. And may your online and offline world be radiant with God's love.
Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
All right. Well, we are here for another podcast. We have two of my favorite people, Gunnar and Deborah Avenellis.
Bless you.
They are a big part of our church, and we are very lucky to have them in our body. They take good care of us, and we love you guys. So thanks for jumping on today. Today we are going to be talking about the gift of limits. Gunnar, what is a gift of limits?
It seems almost...
Talk a little bit closer to the mic.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
You can pull the arm.
Well, there we go. Now I'm set. I was a little bit limited in my capacity there. Gift of limits almost sounds counterintuitive to put those things together, to speak of a gift and limits, because we don't often think of being limited as a good thing. But then we get this insight in the scriptures that God created us to be finite, and while he created us to be in his image, he didn't create us to be him. And so there's this, I think, balance of being an image bearer of God, and yet in helping the world around see who he is and reflect his glory. Our finiteness leads us to dependence. Mm-hmm. And so the gift of limits, I think if we had to try to explain it, is really the gift of being finite, the gift of not being God and yet being close to God, to be a child of God and yet to not be God himself, and to be gifted with the ability to both recognize and embrace our dependence, not loathe our dependence.
Yeah. Deb, what does the gift of limits mean to you?
Well, yeah, when I think of limits in general, the first thing that comes to mind is not a gift. It's like, ugh, you're holding me back. I don't want to be held back. So it's hard to look at limits as a gift. I think if I'm not thinking about God, which, I mean, I try to think about God all the time, but there's a lot of times of my day I quickly forget about God and then just think about myself. So it's easy to think of things that limit what I want to do, where I want to go. It's hard to think of those things as a gift. But as we've gotten to sit and think over this last couple of weeks on the gift of limits, it's been fun to think about, like, wow, God, you have shown me multiple times how my limits are actually good for me. And there's a few places in particular, some books that I've read that helped me see that I was operating in a way that, like, I like to help people, so I would just say yes to every request that came, like, oh, I need someone to watch my kids. Sure, I'll do that, Oh, I need someone, this person needs a meal. Yeah, I'll do that. But somewhere along the way, I started to think that God wanted me to, like, do everything that came my way. And I started to get like overwhelmed by all the needs, and then overcommit a lot, and not just overcommit myself, but then overcommit my family. And then I started serving not with a joyful heart, but with like a pretty resentful heart. And it wasn't until I'd come across this book called The Best Yes that helped me see that by saying yes to everything, I was actually like not even considering what God wanted me to do so many times, you know? And so by finally pausing to ask him like, oh, is this need that's come across like one that you want me to do or not? He was helping me see like, actually, no, you're trying to do everything and you're not me. So you're not made for that. And I found that there is actually a gift in being able to like pause and be like, oh, that's not my responsibility. That's not mine to do. And then I could go back to a place of like serving from a place of like joy and not being overwhelmed and filled with anxiety that I couldn't get everything done. So yeah, I guess I've seen over time like, oh, by setting some healthy boundaries and actually asking God about all these things that I can be doing, like what's mine to do, there's actually a gift of like rest and a gift of peace and a gift of, yeah, just less chaos and strife in our own home, I think.
And this isn't something we come about naturally, because as we raise up our kids, we correlate maturity with independence. And yet as we grow in maturity as a follower of Christ, we actually grow in dependence. And the gift of limits and understanding like who we are and in light of who God is leads us into greater dependence and being close to him. A lot of our favorite verses that we quote in scriptures are actually connected to our limits. And I think of Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. And if we keep going in that same proverb, we read further, be not wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. And so it connects all the way through this idea that you need to lean on someone other than yourself. You need to be lean on the Lord. Like you need to be dependent. Yeah. And as you're growing in dependence on the Lord, you actually will find healing. You'll find refreshment. It just seems counterintuitive because as we raise to maturity the next generation or our kids, we don't correlate the same way. And yet in the life of a believer, God's saying, no, like it is a gift for you to see that you need me in every moment. And maturity isn't, you can do it yourself. Maturity is, you're with me and you're hearing me and you're coming to me. Which, yeah, again, is just not always the way that we want to be, because we desire independence. We see it all the way back in the garden. What were Adam and Eve lured by? The idea of being more like God than God intended for them to be.
So Deb, you talked about, hitting your limits, and I think for the most of the listeners, like they're probably in a similar boat to you, where they have too much going on, they don't have enough time. Yeah. What about the other side, where you have a lot of underperformers like that aren't hitting limits? Like how do we actually like think about this gift of limit for people who are actually not hitting the right limit yet? Like what do you tell to those types people?
Dude, I don't know exactly. Well, let's see. I'm a verbal processor, so sure. Here I go. Yeah. But for someone who's not feeling like they're like hitting their limits or maybe reached their max capacity, would that be another way of saying that? Like going all the way. I think, I don't know. I'm wondering like what are you doing with your time? When you see a need, like, do you feel any responsibility for it? Are there things that you could be doing? I don't know. I think one of the things that I've been learning lately is so often I'm quick to think I know what God wants already. And so I don't even ask him sometimes, And so, but I think for all of us, whether we're at capacity and we feel like we've hit our limits or we're not there yet, I think anytime we see a need around us, it's a great time to bring it to God. Like whether it's someone on the street who needs something or your kid who needs their butt wiped again, like these are times to go to God and just be like, how do you want me to work in this situation right now? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think there's going to be different people on different levels of the spectrum of like limits. And so I don't want to, I do believe there's a lot of moms out there that where they're like, I have no capacity and I continue to say yes to more.
Yeah.
And you touched on that. But then I think there's a lot of maybe high school or college aged boys that are still gaming and, not hitting their limits,
Yeah.
So what do we say to those people to encourage them into this gift as well? I don't know, Gunnar, do you have any thoughts, or we can move on?
No, I think this relates to really as we peel back the onion, where the Lord will use a variety of circumstances to bring us to a place of dependence and relying on Him. Not just so we recognize it internally, but also so it builds in us a behavior of being in prayer before Him, of listening, of taking His cue. Because the Lord, again, sees our heart. He sees our limits. He sees our capacity. And as we look at others, we assume their capacity, where the Lord may have a different design. Because I don't think the Lord is opposed to margin in people's lives. I don't think the Lord looks at a person's life and adds value if you run at 100% go right to the edge. I just don't think He looks at the same that we do oftentimes. And as a result, this is where I think letting the Lord be the one to drive people into action or activity is like the beautiful hope. So the encouragement, or maybe the way we really, I'd say, support or care for those around us, isn't so much looking at their lives with our metric of capacity and performance, but really trying to get them with the Lord, hearing from the Lord, like, what does the Lord have? What's He calling you into? Because again, the Lord sees that perfect picture. And so for the high schooler, as he grows with the Lord, like hopefully it does allow the Lord to speak into his priorities and his time, and even his distractions as to what's healthy and in balance. The same way for that mom who's at wit's end, that the Lord, I have a high belief that the Lord in those moments as she's coming to the Lord, like with I'm exhausted, will be affirming both directly through His word and prayer, and then through others, that you're doing a good work. Like don't overburden yourself if I'm not asking you to step into something. And that's where, again, having that just framework in our lives where we're able to hear from the Lord, we're able to have that time to receive from Him is so important, because otherwise we'll take everybody else's ideas of what our lives should look like and we'll push the yes button on that, versus having the yes button on, well, the Lord called me and I'm clear, and I'm going to walk in that.
Yeah. I would say too, as we're talking about the busy mom who feels a little overwhelmed, this digital fast has been so good for me, like better than I want to admit, because now that means that I probably need to make permanent changes going forward. But I have noticed in not having social media as like a go-to escape, that in places where I typically have been like easily irritated or frustrated with my house or my kids, because there's like too much noise or too much mess or too much whatever, I am finding that because I'm not checking out on social media as much, well, at all right now, I actually have more margin in my mind and like in my thought process to engage with them in a way that I didn't think I was capable of before. In fact, I feel like in these last few weeks, especially, like I've had some really great conversations with my 9-year-olds, my 12-year-old, like just about things that I think normally I wouldn't have had time to like ask them some deeper questions about their behavior. Like, hey, I noticed you seem really frustrated with your brother right now. Like, is there like, did he hurt your feelings earlier? Or, like I didn't see anything happen in the last 10 minutes, but like, is there something else that you're remembering or thinking of? And yeah, I feel like we've gotten to like go into like deeper conversations and talk about things that I'm like, oh my gosh, normally I would have just been like, dude, knock it off or stop it, you know, like my margin for their needs was so much lower because of, I don't know, because I was being a moron and being on social media more than I should have. And by limiting my like input of other stuff, it's actually given me so much more space, I think, to be a more attentive mom and attentive to the needs around me, and helps me again to like, when a need or a request comes, whether from my kids or from someone else, it's been easier to like take a quick second to pause and be like, God, do I need to do this? Do I not? Should I say yes? Should I say no? You know, like, and it's not always like super clear, but at least I'm taking that moment to like think about it.
What, if you had to put a percentage of extra margin that you've gotten back from the digital fast, what percentage would you kind of assign to your consumption of
Oof.
media?
Well, disclaimer, I'm terrible at all number guesstimations, but gosh, I like time-wise, I feel like I've gotten hours of my life back. I guess I could probably look at screen time. That would probably help me. But
well, what's your intrinsic? Do you feel like you're 10% more margin? Maybe this is too hard of a question.
This is a hard question, but I feel like that's easy. No, I have way more margin. I have more grace. So like it's changed the way that I'm like seeing my time. I guess if we say it this way, so normally my kids would get out of school at about 3, and then Gunnar gets home between 5:30 and 6. And those are usually my toughest hours. And I'm like, why the heck am I so irritated so quickly? Like they're barely home for a couple of hours on my own, you know? But I feel like the amount of conflict that I've been able to manage has increased so much. Like I'm not texting Gunnar twice a week to be like, can you please hurry up and get home, these kids? They're making me crazy. Or I can't handle one more fight, you know? Like, yeah.
It's good.
What would you say, Gun?
Yeah, the SOS is definitely reduced in its prevalence. So I think to go along with that, and I don't want to give a percentage for Deborah because that's, I think it's hard to estimate. What I do think the digital fast, even for myself, has highlighted, I might have overestimated my capacity for flourishing.
Oh, heck yeah.
So what we're seeing in our home is that by reducing the inundation of all of this like information or, you know, being on our phone or taking things in that we thought we had capacity for, it's actually taken us to a pace and almost a mental pressure level having dropped as to there's less competing for our attention. That's highlighted like a new mode for flourishing. That, okay, maybe we thought we had capacity to take in all this information, to do all these things, and we're still okay. Well, that okay, I don't think was what God intended okay to be. Maybe there's like a different standard here. And so we've reduced a lot of the noise, reduced a lot of the distraction or other things pulling for our attention. And all of a sudden now, our mental, emotional, spiritual capacity to engage others, to hear from the Lord, is just ticking up little by little. Our kids are feeling it. They're even exhibiting it. It's created healthier habits that we want to keep. And a lot of it was just, I would say, re-establishing kind of a baseline for what can we really take in a day? What can we really commit to in a day? Because in the end, like being on our phone or being committed into like, these are social media channels that I follow, things that I do, it is a commitment of your time and energy.
Yeah,
and so in a sense, by removing some of those things, I think our outlook of what's a healthy rhythm of input and output for our lives and our family that connects to flourishing and not just getting by, because those can be two very different things.
It almost feels like technology becomes an opportunity cost because you're using the time that you could be using for something else, and you're realizing what the opportunities can be when you eliminate some of the distraction.
Absolutely, because often our best yes is the right no. And the digital fast has created some instant no's that have allowed us to say better yeses, or to give time and attention in a less hurried way to things that are much more impactful. And I think that relates just to this idea of limits, of being finite, of not trying to be everywhere or engaged in everything. I don't know what studies say, so I can't speak as if I have data behind it, but I do think there's a ramification of being connected to everything globally in such a way that we're, in a sense, without limits that were once there in terms of what we can know, what we can take in, what we can absorb, and how that affects us mentally, emotionally, physically, and in our rhythms, to where the taking in too much. We weren't built to see everything God sees and to process it well and to still know what to do. And yet we've gotten to a place where we can take in so much at a time, and our kids are taking in so much at a time, way before they're mature enough, I think, to handle it, that now we're seeing this kind of trailing effect of what does it do to their anxious little hearts.
Yeah.
They maybe weren't meant to know that yet. And being limited, even our scope of understanding the world as we grow, I think the Lord knit that in for a reason.
How have you led your wife and your family in kind of growing in this gift of limits? Like, what for some of the men out there where, they have overburdened wives and, they don't know how to quite lead them in that way. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions for us men on how to lead our wives into this kind of gift of limits?
Boy, it's a great question. I'll try to answer it by sharing, I think, some qualities in leadership that the Lord has helped me to either embrace, or whether via pain or watching others try to grow in. There's a book called Lead Like Jesus that we've used within our company over the years as a way to try to set the tone for what does servant leadership look like. And I'd say between some of the things that I've had a chance to read and study through materials like that, but then also again, to learn via trial and error, leading in our home or leading at work has become more effective the more I'm willing to be vulnerable and admit my limitations, and to not hold that I have to have the answers or it has to be my way, but being willing to gospel parent in a way where I'll apologize when I'm wrong, and to try to live out the gospel as a husband, to apologize when I'm wrong, to take input, and to know that while I'm called to lead the family, it doesn't mean I'm called to be the one that has every right answer, make every decision. And the same thing has been true in the workplace, to whereas the Lord has helped me to really be open and need to admit when I'm wrong or admit fault, apologize, exhibit humility in the workplace. It's in a sense helped everybody take a deeper breath and feel more relaxed, because then there's not this, well, if the boss shows that he's impenetrable and is never limited, I better do the same thing. Where the flip side of being willing to say, like, I've got to tune out at this time because I'm with family. Like, there are limits to my time, my availability. That set a tone for others that's okay. It's okay for us to work this way. And then at home to have conversations around, boy, we just can't be everything to all people or do everything. Like, what's best for our family? For Deborah and I to lean in before the Lord, like to hear the Lord, to pray for each other when we think we're off, and to come back around and say, hey, I may have gotten that wrong, but I'm sorry, and like let's work toward this other path, because that's going to be healthier. So I guess maybe in summary, I think the gift of limits at home and work fleshes itself out in an increasing humility and acknowledgement of being finite, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. Like it's okay to not be able to be everything to everyone.
Mm-hmm. And then Deb, as you look about parenting in the limits, what do you want to pass on to your sons and daughters? Obviously you're a pretty high capacity person, so it's got to feel really straining to actually know that you have limits, and then how do you actually in authenticity parent that way? Because
I think being a mom has taught me so much about one, it turns out I wanted to be God and didn't realize it. And I'm trying to control these people and tell them what to do and how to do it. And turns out that's like not the best way to parent all the time, you know? They have to learn a little bit of trial and error as well. I have to give them the freedom to like do things. But I think, gosh, as I look at our family in general, I wanted to raise kids that knew Jesus and knew that they weren't the center of the universe. And so growing up in a family that was like very hospitable, my dad was a pastor, my mom like invited anyone and everyone over all the time. Like, I just thought that's what you should do all the time. And I think for a long time we did. At one point I called our house the Avenellis bed and breakfast, and we would like have people visit. And at one time, I think in a 3-week span, we had like 6 visitors, with our biggest break being a day and a half and our smallest break being a 4-hour period. It was then that I realized I might be doing too much, you know? But anyway, one of the things that God has shown me in that too is like, we had our biological boys. We got these 2 girls through foster care, which was like an answer to prayer. We'd been praying about this. And all of a sudden we had to like quit everything. And that was so hard for me because, well, I'm an extreme extrovert. People give me life, or energy. And all of a sudden we had to like pull back hard. And I saw very quickly how resentful I got about that, and like almost wanted to like blame the girls for like my life changing so hard, when really like, oh, that was so foolish. And I can see now, like, I didn't handle it as well. I wish I could go back and be like, I'm so sorry. But I can too, like, you know, I can always apologize for the things I've gotten wrong. But anyway, I can see now like the gift of cocooning, basically like learning to be now a family of 6, being together. It helped me just see like God has given us this gift of family, and to like get rid of all that outside stuff when the girls came was really hard, but also like gave us time to go deep with each other. And now as they're growing and we've like re-engaged in all the life and activity and church and sports and school and all those things again, I sometimes miss that time where we were like not running full steam ahead, or we didn't have so many places to go, and so it's easier now to see the gift that like time was. And then also as I'm like now helping my kids do that or see that, like they want to do all the sports their friends are doing, or they want to do all the activities. And I'm able to like, well, I don't know how well they're receiving it, but tell them like, we can't do everything because like 1, we weren't made for that. And 2, like, we're just going to do the things that like God is telling our family to do right now. And sometimes that's hard for them to hear. Like they don't like a limit any more than I like a limit. But I think we've gotten to walk through different seasons of life now with them. And so I'm hoping that they're seeing like, actually there's a lot of good and growth coming from those different places. And then I would say too, as I'm raising 4 kids, like some of them are similar and some of them are very different. And I am learning, like we have a daughter with special needs, like her capacity for understanding is different from the other kids' capacity. Her ability to do certain things is different. And so it is, and in essence, a limit to our family and what we can do in certain situations. But also there's a gift in her, like showing us how to live so joyfully, and her showing us like how to work hard and be persistent. And so I think even in that, like just seeing the different abilities and capabilities of our kids and seeing what would be considered a limit, I guess, like cognitively for her, there's still beauty in that, and there's goodness in that, and there's, gosh, she's such a gift to us. Like the joy she brings to our family, the hilarious things she does and says, like there's so much good, you know? And so I think kind of like Gunn was saying earlier, like we view things so much differently from God. And I think he has so much gift for us if we're willing to like pause and look at things his way and not our way all the time.
Yeah.
I think the Lord also uses the gift of limits along that vein, really practically to prune out idolatry.
Oh, for sure.
Because when we feel limited and finite, and the Lord shows us that, and it means letting go of things or ceasing to do some things, we get to wrestle with, have I let a good thing become like a God thing, to where I've pegged my hope or my dreams too much on something? And often it's the good things. It's hosting families all the time. We loved hosting. And even though I bounce between extrovert, introvert, I love having people around, not as much as Deborah does. I admit that. I'm not sure there's many that love it that much. But the Lord used that in such a cool way to let us see our heart. And were you putting too much stock in the next visit from someone?
Yeah.
Was that going to help overcome some frustration versus have you brought that to me?
Yeah.
And pruning is this wild concept where you cut out often what's been good for that which is better, but you can't see yet. And I think part of the Lord giving us limits and showing us limits and limits being a gift is connected to that cycle, where often, the Lord, who is the maker of all creation, doesn't want us to worship the branch that gave us good fruit for a few years. He wants us to worship the maker of the tree. Mm-hmm. And so we may be asked to cut that thing out as a reminder that that's good, but that's not God. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not my source. Mm-hmm. The one who made the tree is my source.
What are some practical things that these listeners can do to grow in the gift of limits? And then, we'll start there. And then I want to, if you could call out just a few gifts or fruits of this gift, like what would be some fruits for you that you've seen? So practical ways to grow in this gift. And then what are for you some of the fruits of this gift? You talked about dependence, so that one kind of...
Yeah, I think that for someone to sit down and pencil out what they value most and what's worth their focus, and then next to that, things that they enjoy but are a distraction, or things that fill their life but are a distraction. I read a quote not long ago that it takes the average human 22 minutes to fully focus. And limitlessness, or a lack of limits, often means an inundation of things that will distract and pull our attention, and often leaves us not putting the best of our focus to the things that actually matter the most. And so to know where maybe boundaries should move, one, I would encourage people to spend some time journaling and praying before the Lord about what fills my day, what gives me life, and Lord, what do you say gives me life or should give me life? But two, if a listener is serious about trying to understand like healthy limits, I think it's worth the time to also try to be intentional in recognizing distractions and the things that, again, they may not be bad things, they may be interesting, but they pull away, or they distract, or they pop in, or they encroach on our time in an unannounced way often. And how could those be set aside for a season to watch the impact? Mm-hmm. We never would have realized some of what we've realized during this digital fast had it not been truly a digital fast. Mm-hmm. And really, fasting itself is connected to the gift of limits, in that fasting is to set something aside that has been part of your routine for a period of time to see that which the Lord will do. It's an act of dependence, that we're setting aside something that was routine and being dependent that the Lord will more than fill the gap for what we've set aside. Deborah, what do you have? What you got?
Practical ways to walk in this. Gosh, I mean, I'm just trying to think. I have been trying to practice silence and solitude a little more this year, and I know I have the privilege of having probably more time than most people because my kids go to school and I don't work. And so I can set a timer for 2 hours where I'm like on a Monday and have complete silence. But one thing that has been so beneficial to my life that I think everyone can do is I try to wake up before anyone else in my house wakes up. And it's just me and my dog usually. And to set a time where I'm not letting anything come into my mind but God. And so for me in the morning, that looks like my cup of coffee and my dog and my Bible and my journal. I'd have to journal out my morning prayers or else I get too distracted. So I like write them down. And it's a good time to like focus on like how yesterday ended, the good things that happened, the things I did wrong that I can like repent and confess of, and the things that I'm looking forward to this day and like surrendering those to God. And then I read my Bible, and those, I feel like that is one practical way that anybody can like embrace the limits. Like, I'm not God, so I don't know everything. I need help. I need wisdom. I need discernment. Like, I think that's one way we can like acknowledge, like, well, for me, I realize like I am a chronic people pleaser. And it's because so often I want to say yes to everyone so they'll like me, so they'll think I'm great. So I'm included in everything because I'm afraid if I say no, they might not include me again, you know, like, and so in so many ways, like I've made myself the idol, myself and my attention and, you know, people's praise of me. And by taking time to acknowledge that I am not God and that I actually need him, like Gunn was saying, to be more dependent on him, I think that's one way we grow in like realizing like the limits that he has placed on us are actually a gift. Like, I am a finite being. I can only be in one place at one time, even though I'm trying to like be everywhere at one time. And I can't know everything, and I shouldn't. Like, it's actually none of my business in a lot of ways, what other people think of me, what my neighbors are doing, what the future holds. Like, I think we can all practice the gift of limits by just acknowledging the places where we're trying to be like God and realize like, actually, I don't need to know everything. I don't need to be everywhere. I don't even need to like fill my every need, whether that's food or consumption of, you know, anything, you know. I think by just acknowledging those things, we can grow in our gift of limits.
It's good.
Yeah. One more thing to add to that, prayer really is our most available and powerful act of dependence. It almost seems so simple that I think we disregard it and we elevate other practices like fasting or, but when you look at it, Jesus prayed the hard things. He points us to pray all throughout the scriptures, like those that are hearing from the Lord, that are taking the courageous acts of dependence that we applaud, that we celebrate, that the scriptures celebrate. Prayer marked their lives as that act of limit, that acknowledges the limit, but also engages the way that God means for us to embrace the limit and being who we are in light of who he is. And so I think that, you know, Deborah every morning spends time journaling her prayers out. She's very intentional about prayer. And that's been a huge part of her hearing from the Lord that's allowed her not only to be okay with some of the limits that God has brought into our family versus maybe what she thought it would look like years and years ago, but also to embrace them, to know these are God-given limits for us that have been healthy.
Yeah. Do you guys have any kind of final thoughts that you want to share with the group? Anything to take us home?
When it comes to the digital media fast, I'm hoping that for others, like it's been our experience, creating space, the Lord is filled with things that are so much better than what we gave up. I know in our home, there's become a more regular routine of some devotional time together. I've had a chance to start with my boys a regular morning reading of a little Psalms devotional, just a quick little one-page deal that's even carried through when I've traveled, because I travel some for work, to where on the few mornings I've traveled during this fast, 6:30 a.m. we're on the phone and they're reading me from the Tim Keller devotional, and that they're so excited about it.
Cool.
And just seeing some habits built that didn't take much time, but just took enough space.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hopeful that others have similar stories where the space being created by saying no to our screens and our phones is creating the opportunity to not just say yes, but regularly engage in some things that could be healthy habits that may affect the generations to come.
Yeah. Little plug, Kinley and I read a book called Stolen Focus, and it is a lot of the stuff we talked about is in that vein where, these developers in Silicon Valley learned the psychology of this technology, and the whole point was to get as much of our time as possible, and they've built that into their code. And so I think we're on to something. I'm glad Travis has asked us to participate with him in this, because our family is experiencing similar things to you guys. So
yeah, and the Lord in his wisdom gave us the gift of limits before the fall. Like, the gift of limits is not a result of all of a sudden there's sin and we're broken. The Sabbath was a part of the routine before the fall, like to rest, to create space, to limit what could be done on a day for the sake of really resting. And I think that's part of what we're on to is, oh wow, there's the space to rest and to not take every moment and fill it so full to what I deem as capacity, but to actually embark on trying a routine that looks slow as to what our society and culture has called slow, but may actually align with a little bit more of what God intended things to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think my closing thing that I would say or hold on to is that I have noticed that in every place where I have embraced a limit God has given me and not fought against it, like, he's given me himself. Like, I have more intimacy with Jesus. I have a clear understanding of God and his greatness when I have accepted and embraced the limits that are put on me. And then it has given me more peace and more freedom in my day-to-day life, in the situation, in that circumstance. And so, yeah, I think it's good to realize as we look at limits not as an enemy, but as a gift, then we can just get more of him. Mm-hmm. And I think that's awesome.
It's interesting is that as we embrace our own limits, we actually get the limitlessness in him. So it's the faster we can put the cap on ourselves, the faster we get into his power.
So good.
Yeah, that's good too. Yeah. Well, thank you guys. This was fun. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Thanks for leading us in this one today.
I feel like
great.
Joe Rogan.
Oh, shoot.
The clean version. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
As you might have noticed, we missed last week. We hope to make up that episode in a future bonus episode. But for now, thanks for going on this journey with us. Thank you to all of our amazing speakers, and thanks to Monica Stahl for the music. Finally, thank you to Dr. Darren Whitehead for his amazing book that this digital fast and podcast were inspired by. Until next time, church.